So let's get started. How art will influence a post-pandemic world. Speakers, a very warm welcome. Firstly, I just want to do a personal check-in. Drue, let's start with you. Drue and Ben both are in their amazing work studios and they've got incredible backgrounds. I'm sure they'll share a bit about that. But Drue, how are you managing your own well-being during this time, which has just been so challenging and very different to normal? How are you doing?
Thank you, Juliet, for hosting, and thank you so much to the Worth family and extended family. Thank you to each and every one of you who tuned in today. First of all, I'd like to say that my heart goes out to all those who have suffered through this, who have died, who have been affected health-wise or financially. It has not been an easy time for anybody, and I don't know anyone who has not been negatively affected in multiple ways. And I want to be very conscious about thinking about those people who have been affected in the deepest ways. But as artists, we are optimistic and we look for the silver lining. And as far as creativity goes, there are really two positive factors to this, as I see. There's the isolation element of it. And as an artist, you really have to get into a kind of tunnel to create great things. So that's something that's much easier now. And when you think about it, in the past, pandemics have tended to be a very creative time, whether it was Isaac Newton or Florence, which flourished during a time of plagues. So the isolation can be good for creativity. And second of all, the great pain, the great anguish that you experience in the world, that is something that you can also channel into the artwork and can be an extraordinary type of creative fuel as well. So those are two positive elements.
Thank you, Drue. And whereabouts are you in the world, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with everyone?
I am in Silicon Valley in Northern California. I'm about 15 minutes from Stanford University.
Great, thank you. And Ben, hi, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. I want to extend the same thanks that Drue stated. Thanks to you and to Worth and to everyone that joined today. Just really privileged to be here. I'm doing pretty well. It's this mix, I think, pretty much reiterating what Drue just said. It's a mix between tremendous amount of sympathy and empathy for the people that are suffering and have suffered losses of work, all of that. And at the same time, I think for artists, life hasn't been that different. In certain ways, it's been enhanced because your isolationist tendencies tend to be encouraged now, where normally they're not. So there's been a lot of productivity, but outside of that, I've just seen such an enormous amount of warmth and generosity from so many different sectors that I found incredibly inspiring. And I've been trying to benefit from that, just listening in like most people as much as possible and trying to contribute as I can.
Thank you. And Kathy, how are you doing? Oh, actually, Ben, sorry, you're in New York, aren't you?
I'm in New York. We have a few labs for our my company. So I'm upstate in Kingston, New York at the moment, but living in New York City.
Right. Thank you. And Kathy's also on the East Coast too. Kathy, hi, how are you? And if you could just share a bit about your background and the nature of work you do too.
Absolutely. Thanks, Juliet. And it's great to be here with Drue and Ben and you and everybody else. So thank you for that. I'm a private wealth advisor. I help families, business owners, entrepreneurs take the resources they have, figure out what their priorities are when it comes to their goals and values, and help them match those up. So we have a lot of clients who are particularly interested in art or other areas of investment. I have to say, Drue, I literally had tears in my eyes watching that video. I kid you not, it was so touching. And I think that is what art is to all of us. It inspires us, it moves us, and it encourages us. So thank you for that. And then also your backstory, knowing you for the last 6 months has been a real gift as well. So we will help clients who are interested in art find ways to purchase the art, and ways to, sometimes they would like to use some specialty financing and things like that. So we will direct them or share ideas with them to do so, and along with many other things.
Thank you, Kathy. And Drue, that video is extraordinary. I'd love it if you could just sort of share, just take a step back and discuss a bit about the work that you do and how you got into art in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words, Kathy. It's been awesome seeing you in your element, doing what you do in this past year as well. And all of us brought together through the extraordinary webs of the Worth family and Jim McCann and Juliet and everybody. So thank you. Yeah, so I'm running the leading art studio in Silicon Valley. We are serving top collectors in over 30 countries and 5 continents. We're blessed and privileged to be working with some extraordinary art collectors here in the Bay Area and also around the world. And we're working in primarily 3 genres of works. We see like a unifying thread across all of those, of the artwork as this living organism that transforms the environment. It's different with every experience and also enhances your creative well-being. And the first type of works that we're creating, and you saw some of them in the video, are the Ambrosia Series, and there's like one behind me back here. This is the great majority of works that we're currently shipping around the world today. It's one of our signature works. It's colorful, it interacts powerfully with the light. It's an interactive art form that we've developed that is the first fully modular work that we've created. So there's over 196 billion physical configuration permutations. In other words, you as the collector can take the pieces inside and move them and change the rotation and the position, which subtly changes how the work looks and how the light goes through it. And it has these perceivable differences. And those works were inspired and influenced by neural networks. The second type of works that we do are mirror polished stainless steel works. Those are very bespoke and probably our most high-touch works. We use our signature vocabulary of complex, highly faceted reflective surfaces that are inspired by the physics of breaking glass. And then the third genre of work would be the technology art, which takes many shapes, but one big area is virtual reality, which we believe is this huge transformative emerging art form that's going to also encompass and define our lives, much like the Gothic cathedrals did in the Middle Ages. We also work with genres, technological genres like EEG, brainwaves, scientific conceptual work like art that I created for the first zero gravity art exhibit in space at the International Space Station, leveraging relativistic effects and time dilation. So those are the genres. And then I should say that the majority of the work that we do is privately commissioned. It's direct to consumer. And we think that this is a great model, that it's a return actually to the original model of the Renaissance and other great time periods in art history. Most of the great artworks of humanity across cultures have actually been created in this model. And I think we forget that the gallery is something that just existed for the past 100 years. And what we like about doing that at Drue Kataoka Studios is that it's creatively rewarding for us, it's creatively rewarding for our customers, and it creates great financial value because we can offer a much better price. And it's also very high quality because we are able to invest a lot into the actual materials, the team, the production process. So that would be my take on Worth Beyond Wealth.
Thank you. And I think what's extraordinary about what you do, Drue, is you really push the boundaries of how art is evolving. And I think it's very relevant for the time that we're now in. And a lot of what you talk about actually speaks to the left and the right side of the brain. But Ben, I'd love you to share a bit about Artmatr, because I know that also you've brought technology in quite significantly into the work that you do. If you could just take a step back and talk a bit about how you got into art and Artmatr.
For sure, thanks. My background is as a painter. For most of my career, I helped to classically trained. So I helped to found a painting school in Israel when I was much younger, in my 20s, where I taught at for 7 years. And the idea of building projects along with the very private painting practice was has stayed with me. So I moved from Israel back to New York, where I'm from, in 2004, I think, and I started a nonprofit at that time that was based around bridging art and architecture, partially because I felt, even at that time, you could just see how every creative domain was starting to be transformed by digital tech, except for painting. And I saw the need for things like Drue is doing, one of the cutting edge artists that's pulling kind of ancient principles into the contemporary world through the mediums and the processes that are relevant. And I just felt like there was something wrong with painting from that aspect, that it somehow wasn't becoming relevant. And so while the painting career was good by most metrics, showing in big galleries for good prices, and doing big public commissions. I did a big, massive installation in Bryant Park about 5-6 years ago. It was about 60 feet tall and cost $250,000, and it was exciting. But it just was not satisfying me. Part of it was the relevance to technology. I think the bigger part of it was more about connecting to people. I think that for me was really the important aspect of being relevant. It's that sense of really being able to connect to people, and it's not just in the images that you create, it's the medium. That's a huge part of it. And digital technology now captivates everybody, for many reasons we know, many reasons we don't, I think. And so I took it upon myself to start trying to do something about it by creating a business. And I just, artist background, no business chops, no engineering chops, but I got a job teaching at MIT, teaching painting to engineers, which was fascinating. One, how fast they grabbed onto the artistic aesthetic ideas. Secondarily, how much they could think about reverse engineering the painting process. So we started building painting machines, started getting help from other universities in Germany and New York City, and getting help from some corporate sponsors. That's been going on for about 4 or 5 years. We started prototyping new machines that we took out to some both student level and very high level artists to start playing around with over the past year. And now I'm happy to say we are about 2 months away from our first professional version of our printer that allows anyone to use a printer to make things that are indistinguishable from normal paintings. And I think and hope that it is the future of not only painting, but also photography, advertising, product design, architecture, and probably a bunch of other domains.
That's amazing. Thanks, Ben. And I just want to say a warm welcome to everyone. A few people have joined recently. I just thank you for joining the session 5 of The Next Normal and How Art Will Influence a Post-Pandemic World. I'm delighted to be joined by Drue, Kataoka and Ben Tritt and Kathy Entwistle to talk about the future of art and creativity. We've got a few questions coming in, and before I go to those, Drue, I'd love just to talk about how the current crisis has affected you day to day as an artist, and has there, because so much of your work is, I guess, sort of done independently, has there been much of a difference, and how have you had to adapt?
So everybody on my team is working remotely, and that's difficult. That definitely presents challenges. We've had difficulties with certain things in the supply chain and certain materials. There's a lot of different interdependencies that we rely on. Before COVID, Q4 of last year and then Q1 of this year was so busy. My biggest concern was just the capacity and how we were going to meet that. So COVID kind of solved that problem a little bit because I mean, my problem is always that I have such a high standard of quality for how we do everything and all the processes that we go through, that there's a constraint that is our biggest constraint. So that said, I will say that I think we had a lot of bookings for a lot of projects. Some of them we had to cancel, but we've still been extremely busy. And we also have really resilient relationships with clients over the years. We have a lot of repeat business from clients. You know, one thing that's harder, I think, for everyone, everyone would probably agree with this, is new relationships with new clients. So, you know, every year or every month we'll have studio visits from domestic or international visitors, people who are new to the work, and all those people, they can't travel. And it's very important with art that you see it in person, that it's especially something that's this experiential, the works that we create, which are just changing from every angle. It's very hard to do that remotely, or to establish that kind of spark of the relationship remotely. I think art is something that you need to experience firsthand, but we're also experimenting with doing virtual studio visits and that kind of thing. And I think that being in an artist studio is something very special and has traditionally been reserved for patrons and for different people in the art world and this type of thing. And so one of the nice things about this quarantine situation is that the world is getting a glimpse into a lot more art studio spaces that they normally wouldn't have access to. So Ben and I are both in our workspaces right now, which we normally wouldn't be probably broadcasting from.
Ben, tell us what's behind you.
We've got, well, there are two things. One is one of our printers. So we have a very, very large, massive flatbed in the back. That is like a $120,000 industrial HP flatbed, which I hate. And then one of ours, which is like a $5,000 version of their printer that's suitable for artists, you know, and photographers, and fully interactive, fully programmable on the hardware side. So people use it creatively, totally different than they would in the other printer.
And how has the last few months affected you on a day-to-day basis? How are you showcasing what you're doing? Are you also experimenting with sort of different ways to bring people in?
Yeah, so it's been fascinating for us because we had been planning the new version of this printer coming out that's ready to kind of not exactly take to market, but put into a beta program. So we were trying to figure out how to get a number of these into schools and to, you know, in the hands of artists. And then that quickly switched as soon as COVID hit, and we were talking to some folks at Google and some other places to help out with that. And I said, let's think differently. Let's create one lab, or, you know, maybe 2 or 3 tops, and create a remote access platform. So artists from anywhere around the world can essentially dial in and use the tools. And the goal around that is not just to create something in lieu of actually being there, but use everything about the digital experience to actually create an enhanced experience, better than being there. So in addition to the printer, around me, we've got a whole series of cameras. We're gonna, in the end, probably have about 20 cameras, some of them high definition cameras, and a 3D scanning mechanism. So people can generate lots of assets that then they can create videos around, put in you know, VR or AR environments, and just create a lot of content which is native to a digital domain, and more exciting, just give you a lot more granularity and experiences and optics than you would get by being there in person.
And a lot of industry insiders have noted that the crisis has kind of encouraged more collaboration and created more opportunities for collaboration. Would you agree with that in your field?
I would say off the charts, yes. I think this has been a shift that has been slowly like moving across the creative domains. I think in the fine arts, it's been very slow, but the awareness has been there for a while, and those things that were somewhat, not on the back burner, but kind of on a slow simmer, I think now are at a boil, and people are rushing to figure out how to deal with this, partially to transform the businesses to stay afloat, partially because there's just so much activity happening now. People are excited. I think both are interesting, and you know, we're looking at things from both angles.
So we've touched on the sort of impact on you both personally, and now looking at a sort of more macro level. There's a question from Donato Cabrera. If Donato is there, I'll go to Donato. Are you there?
Yes. Hi. Now I have to remember my question. Sent it in. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. Hi. This question, and hi, Drue. And
hi, Donato.
Hi. And Ben's great to hear from you both. My question is with regard to how you see not only the visual arts reaching out into the world post-pandemic, current pandemic, but also how the performing arts. I'm a conductor, so I'm my particular field is classical music and orchestra. How you see technology marrying with with the performing arts in a way they haven't yet, and do you see this happening sooner rather than later, and maybe some of the if you can dream into the future, how that would look?
What do you mean by mirroring?
Well, in
Just
terms
understand
of
your question.
in terms of, you know, the performing arts haven't really, in my opinion, with regard to the orchestra world and perhaps other genres, we haven't really explored the virtual reality in a way that I think is already a very exciting prospect. So I feel that the visual arts have a natural in, especially what you do, Drue, is already really at the forefront of that. And I feel that aside from sort of playing catch up, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for the performing arts to explore this.
I have something I could chime in on that front.
Go on, Ben.
My feeling is that no matter what discipline you're in, the future of all of them are immersive. So whether you are a musician, performing artist, visual artist, people are hungering for immersive media. So I think the future on things like TikTok is for artists to be able to collaborate with musicians, with, you know, all the adjacent domains to make that content interesting and engaging to people, but collaborative, right? So I think in terms of promotion, I think that's an essential.
And Drue, do you see, just sort of building on that question, what shifts are you seeing in the performing arts space, or are you seeing any shifts in the performing arts space that you think they could perhaps learn from the ways that you're pushing the boundaries around art and creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the future is immersive, and you can even think of low-tech technologies in that way, like podcasts, the shift to podcasts where people just want to delve into something and listen to it for 4 hours and immerse themselves in that. And that's an audio technology that's kind of interesting to look at. But virtual reality is mimicking reality, or it's creating a whole new type of reality. And within that, it's encompassing or aspires to encompass all of the different senses. We're not there yet, but the visual one is the most developed, but the oral part of that is as important, if not in some cases more important, depending on the situation. There's the haptic component, which is the touch component, which is still very early on in its development. And then there's the olfactory component, which people can kind of experiment with, but of course we do not have a robust technology for that. But definitely in the future, you will have the olfactory, the haptic, the visual, and the auditory all working together in concert, no pun intended for you, Donato, there, to really create a tactile, immersive experience that is surreal for the viewer and can have quite a deep impact on the experience. I mean, I have always said that virtual reality is not a technology, that virtual reality is actually just an art form, because what it is essentially the realization of a dream that artists have had since the dawn of civilization. You know, when we had the first cave paintings on Lascaux walls, the artist had the chalk and they had the curve of the cave wall, and they wanted to immerse us in the bison hunt and take us there and transport us, and they pushed the technology to its absolute limits. And then we jump to the Renaissance, and we have Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel taking us to the dawn of creation and pushing fresco painting to its limits. And now we're at this precipice where we can actually atom by atom, pixel by pixel, build entire whole worlds. And the audio component, the oral component, the way that can interact in a sophisticated way with the visual experience, and where we are working in 3 dimensions, actually 4 dimensions, because we have that 4th dimension of time, is just going to be revolutionary. Also, we have to understand that in these worlds, the so-called viewer, which that doesn't even make sense as a term anymore, has so much more agency. Whereas before, when you would look at a painting and there's kind of a fixed viewpoint, or even a proscenium for a concert where there's one kind of fixed viewpoint for the audience, now a person can move in all directions. And in a virtual symphonic experience, you could technically move right next to the conductor, go stand with the percussion section, and totally break out of the physical constraints that you had before.
And Drue, like the innovation that you have already been exploring and embracing is extraordinary. How is that changing through this time, if at all? Is it accelerating and pushing it further forward, or the sort of the world of virtual reality? How do you see that changing post-pandemic?
Well, for us personally, you know, I mean, I've had a lot of breakthroughs, and there's always new things that I'm building and breaking and discovering. And if you are working with this emergent technology, yes, you are breaking things all the time. It's very unstable because it's so new. And so I've learned, I'm always learning things. I'm always in a learning mode. As far as the overall art world, I think it's great, because the art world has always kind of held technology a bit at arm's length and has had a kind of sort of discomfort with it. And now they're kind of being pushed. And I think this shift into digital is going to be accelerated by COVID. That's definitely going to happen. And I think the division between art and technology is an artificial one, because when we look at the greatest times of creativity in human civilization, we look at something like the Renaissance. That was a time when art and technology were intertwined, and when we had a tremendous amount of surface area between all the different disciplines. And I think we a bit went back into our silos, and now in this kind of era of the 4th industrial revolution, where we have artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality, various neurotechnologies, and then we have this social impact of quarantine, we're going to see more bridges that are built between the disciplines. Yet I feel it's incumbent upon us to help build that connective tissue between the disciplines. So I think that the shift to digital is going to be and to technology is going to be accelerated in the art world, and that's a good thing, because one of the things that I always say is that art is technology, and technology is art. so on its face, that seems like a radical statement, but it's true, because when art reaches its highest form, it becomes a kind of technology. And when technology reaches its highest form, it becomes art. It becomes like art. So it's really just a circle when you reach those apexes.
Yeah, or a new opera, as I think Donato would describe it as. So changing tack slightly, I want to just talk about the sort of valuation of art.
Can I jump in 1 second?
Yeah, go on, Ben.
I'm so sorry. Drue, I just fell in love with you.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful and well articulated. I was just blown away. It was so beautiful. I just want to say that before we move on.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Ben. And I did not know that you went to go work with engineers at MIT, and I totally can understand how they took to what you were showing them. It actually, it makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm so glad there's people like you in this world that's what I'm talking about. We need people like you, like Donato is also doing great things in the world of music, to build that interstitial space, to build that liminal space, to build that connective tissue between the disciplines. The story that you told me actually reminded me about Richard Feynman, because Richard Feynman was, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. He was someone who also, in his 40s, decided he wanted to start painting. He could have just as well taken one of your painting classes, Ben. And he tells an amazing story of walking into his first painting class. There's 12 people. They're all sketching a naked woman, and he's totally out of his depth. He doesn't know what he's doing. He feels very uncomfortable. And it's amazing, because here's someone who was advising NASA. He was advising presidents, and yet he went outside of his comfort zone. And then, long story short, he actually ends up developing an extraordinary body of work, of paintings, and refracting his unique worldview through the art that he created in a way that only he could. But the point of that story is that we all have comfort zones. And I think it's important for us to step outside of those comfort zones into other disciplines and kind of reach across the aisle, because that's where the exciting things will be built. So I love that you did that, and that you went to MIT and you started to create those collaborations.
Yeah, and outside of printers, outside of any other product, my main goal with the company, with my life, my role as an artist, is just creating that connective tissue, is just bridging those disciplines and easing that level of communication. So I just see, as soon as we can fill that barrier, so people on polar ends of those spectrums can find a way to communicate through the intermediaries, we have a new world where just as you articulated, there is no separation between art and technology. There's just a seamless play across these various domains.
And just as a kind of wordplay, riffing off of you, when you say coming across the other side of the polar ends, that's polarization. And we all know that we live in a world with too much polarization, right? So anything that kind of is the opposite of that is a good thing.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what's interesting too, sorry to interrupt. So Drue we were just talking about, Ben, the disciplines. So I'm curious if there's more to the disciplines. Obviously technology and art so important, but are there other ways that those disciplines can reach across to other disciplines as well? And if so, what would that be?
Say more about that, Kathy. Like, what do you mean?
Well, could, art and technology, could it also come across to, we were talking about music, right, and entertainment, and could it go into, last week, Juliet and I had the pleasure of speaking with the commissioner of Major League Soccer and talking about how sports might come back into play, no pun intended. So is there a way to bring this art and this technology into those areas too?
For me, I have like 10 different answers to that question. One thing I think is that a lot of the times the way you get innovation is you put technology in the hands of artists to just fuck around with it, really, right? So my company, built by artists, essentially, is now talking to an aerospace manufacturer, potentially military, about an application of this new technology. the military. And I'm thinking, why are they not going to all these other robotics companies or printing companies that have billions of dollars at their disposal and ridiculous amounts of know-how way beyond what we have? And the simple answer is they haven't thought of how to use it differently because they're so constrained within a very simple engineering framework. So just getting people that design for sports games, for arenas, the technology around the optics, around the cameras, that can be used in conference, in video conferencing or in people's studios to get better optics, to communicate across the domains between just on social channels, all those things. If we just get those people in greater proximity so that they can talk and see what each other are up to, I think that generates this kind of explosive type of creativity where the technology innovation and the creative applications start to merge and flow back and forth. That would be the biggest answer I'd have to that question.
I think it's interesting because we're seeing through so many of these conversations that so many industries are going through the same challenges, and actually going back to the point around connective tissue and thinking about how art and technology weaves through all of those different disciplines and sectors. Actually, there's a lot of parallels with any sector at this moment in time with what they're going through, and I think that's sort of the notion of collaboration and joining these things together, and the acceleration of digital transformation feels like it's applicable to so many industries and companies and people that we've been talking to. I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to so there's one on valuation, and Kathy, this will come to you in a minute, but it's around how the pandemic's affected the art market for buyers. So let's come to that in a sec. We have a question from Rob Collarina, if Rob is there, just building on the technology and art piece. Rob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Juliet. Yes, my question, and Kathy, you sort of segued well. I know UBS was famous for Art Basel the last couple of Decembers there. But during this pause, do you see the case for devices? I think someone mentioned podcasts and a little bit for the speakers, but the fact that either older generations or frankly folks that were less inclined of having these personal devices are actually going to be more consumers of that, or greater bandwidth or the like, because they have they recognize they couldn't go to museums, they couldn't go to concerts, and then there's going to be sort of a correction mode sort of upon sort of the new normal. So that's my question to the panelists.
Who wants to take that? So I think it's that. Yeah, go on.
I'm happy to start. I'll start with the financial aspect, and then maybe Ben and Drue can take it, from there. Just very quickly, we see anything that has to do with digital transformation. That's what I've been looking at for a while now, and Juliet knows that because we've talked about it a few times. And it was really interesting to hear Drue bring up the fourth, industrial revolution in a sense, because that's what we're looking at. All of this robotics and artificial intelligence and digital transformation and e-commerce and anything that is moving forward, and this whole conversation about taking where we are today and thinking outside the box, but in a new way and in a forward-looking way. And that's what we're doing with our clients, and thinking of when we think about investing and where we want to look towards investing. But also, I think from an investment standpoint in the art world, Drue and Ben can speak about that. But again, looking forward to, what Drue and Ben are talking about today it's almost like mind-blowing to see where we are already, and then to be able to get a picture into, or a view into, where we're going. And that is the most valuable thing that we have, is the ability to change and transform and to go towards something like bigger and unknown, but really exciting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm so torn because it's something I really want to say, and I just want to shut up and hear Drue talk. I don't know. Okay, I'll say something really quick. So I want to make an appeal to all of the investors that are listening to this. Selfishly, but also I think coming from a place of truth. If you could go back in time to the early 90s and show somebody offering a digital camera back that cost $50,000 without even the processing power to deal with the 100 megabyte files that it would generate, they would have sounded like weird techies with developing a product with no application that was absurdly, expensive. If you could go back in time and explain to someone what Instagram was in the early 90s, they wouldn't have understood. And I think that's what's really exciting here. So you can't talk about what exactly is the product that's going to transform X industry. I think you have to look at the ecosystem and the culture. And the appeal that I mentioned is any place where you have that connective tissue forming between art and technology, there is big business. Exactly the product, exactly the company, nobody knows that. But the culture, if you see where the culture is happening, to me, that's where you want to put your resources, your money, your business expertise to figure out how to help the engineers and the artists that don't know crap about business to figure out how to grow, how to take products to market, how to market, how to promote. That's what we're struggling with. That's why we're kind of reaching out to the business community for help. At least that's my perspective.
Drue?
Yes, so his question was about how like a lot of different populations will start to use these different devices and what that will mean. And then I'm listening to what Ben is talking about in terms of what will the exact particulars of this new world be. No, we can't exactly know. We can make predictions. But one thing I can say for sure that's very important for us to watch out for, because we made this mistake already with the internet. And I'm hoping that we don't make that mistake again. And that is that we ended up creating a technological infrastructure and culture that put a lot more weight on consumption rather than on creation. So everything puts you in this posture of being a consumer. You can just think about how much stuff you browse and how easy it is to just consume, digest, just swallow wholesale stuff, whether browsing on your iPad or social media, or even acts that are marketed to you as being creative, like, oh, Pinterest, you're a curator, you're just, essentially all those activities are just kind of regurgitating and rearranging other things. It's not an original form of creativity. Up to this point, it's still easier to go into the offline world and build something totally original and new. There's many more barriers in the internet to do that. Now, as we enter into new forms of creation through artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, we do have the opportunity to take more of an active stance, of a creative stance, and say, no, we're not just going to be the consumers, but take more of kind of artistic, creative view upon things. Because if we all just sit back and become consumers, the image that I would like to give you today is like the image from the movie WALL-E, where there's those really round, hugely obese people who all they can do is sip the sugar water, and when the sugar water falls off their little cart, they can't even pick it up again, because all they are doing is watching the digital information that's around them and just sucking it in. They've completely gone out of balance with the creative with respect to the consuming. So that's something that we have to all be vigilant on, because from the corporate angle and from a lot of these big technology companies, they want you to consume because it means that they'll be able to sell more ads, they'll be able to monetize you better. But what happens when you have a population of people who are all passive and just consuming? That's a population that's going to be a lot easier to manipulate politically, and that can lead to bad things.
And what do you think the role going forward of art galleries and museums and those institutions are, Drue? It's interesting. My mum keeps sending me things that other sort of art galleries and museums are doing in the UK and Europe. And what do you think their responsibility is, and what do you think their role is going forward to connect artists with art enthusiasts and art investors?
Well, it's interesting when you say their role in connecting art to art enthusiasts or art investors. Typically, in the past, the traditional art world has tried to remove artists out of the picture. So even when you think about going to a museum, you see an extraordinary work of art, and there's this little teeny wall text on the wall. And there's all of this history and all of these layers that perhaps maybe a decade or something went into that work that we don't really know what it is. And the voice of the artist is completely removed. So I think they need to figure out ways to make the voice of the artist more prevalent it's something that helps the work come alive, but it doesn't matter if they do or if they don't, because we're talking about a lot of shifts here. We're talking about the shift to digital, the technological shifts. We're also going to be seeing a shift to more power coming into the individual artist's hands and also the patron's hands. And a lot of the different intermediaries and the kind of interstitial layers of the art world, a lot of different things like in the gallery system, those are just kind of going to fall away. I think the shift is going to come towards the individual artists and art studios and also the patrons that work with them to make great things happen, to build great things in the world. I think that the contemporary art world has had a very big king's new clothes issue, kind of the emperor's new clothes issue. The great example of this is the white painting. There's a painting, it's white, and it was painted white. This is something that, was a big thing in New York, but this is the type of thing that does not fly in Silicon Valley or really anywhere where people are thinking critically. You see something like that, you'll get a really intricate explanation of why it's expensive and, what it's all about. And then you start to question your own judgment. Like maybe there's something wrong with me because I don't understand this white painting. And as we see the shift into virtual spaces, like very elaborate virtual environments and artwork moving completely into virtual reality, what's going to happen is that type of work is going to lose its value, because when you see like a white painting, part of its appeal is that it's in a gorgeous white space embedded in an expensive neighborhood. There's a lot of psychological setup that pushes you to attribute some sort of value to it. And then when you combine that with branding and someone says that, wow, this was sold at auction at Christie's, as I said, some relatively smart people will start to question their own judgment. But when you take something like that, like a white painting, which essentially becomes a white JPEG, and you put it in a virtual environment, it loses all of its cachet. And the type of work that will really shine in this new technological framework is a work that's a lot more robust and complex and is essentially moving across 4 dimensions.
I feel like we need to have multiple sessions on this topic, because it's absolutely fascinating. I want to ask you both about who you look to for inspiration. Before that, Kathy, what about the art market for buyers? And I'm assuming a lot of your clients like to invest in art. Is there anything different in the advice that you're giving them right now?
Well, I think right now it's just very different for everybody. And as Drue and Ben has said, and you have said as well, it's just a different time period. So everybody's more like contained and staying closer to home and not having the opportunity to browse and see things firsthand like they might have in the past. So for right now, we're just, waiting and seeing what happens. I do have clients who also work in the art world, and there's a lot of furloughing going on and things like that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where the new or the next normal will be in that area too. And as Drue said, in the past, it used to be being commissioned. Art was commissioned specifically for an individual or an empire or whatever it may be. And in the past 100 years, it's been more like go and take a look and see what catches your inspiration. So it may be changing a little bit, and I think people like Drue are leading the way. So we'll see where it goes. But I don't have a real answer for you right now because it's still in that transition phase.
And if I can just tag along to that, and Kathy is again making this important point, which I like to talk about a lot, which is the difference between the commission model, which is the model that has brought us the greatest masterpieces in civilization, versus the gallery system, which is something that's relatively new, only like 100 years old, and it is a form of retail. That's what it is. And it's funny because last year, before COVID, I was saying that the gallery system is on ventilators because retail is also on ventilators. And this was even before we were entering a big retail crisis. But retail has been, dying over the past 30 years. And the gallery is a form of retail. And as such, it has some very important characteristics that it bears with retail. For example, standardization. It's very important in a gallery. It's very important in retail that you standardize products. Drip painting, drip painting, drip painting, spot painting, spot painting, spot painting. A Prada bag should look like a Prada bag a mile away. A Chanel bag should look like a branded Chanel bag from outer space. Highly differentiated and unique works do not sell well in a retail context. The Sistine Chapel is an immortal artwork precisely because it's so unique and so irreplaceable, and there's decades of work that went into it. So I just wanted to add some more depth to this whole notion of retail, and also why that is a model, just from a pure unit economics point of view, that is really a model that cannot allow us to create immortal masterpieces or really substantial works of art. And I can go into the unit economics of that if you want to know about it.
I think that's going to be session 2. Drue, thank you. Just before we close, Ben, I'd like to share just a bit about sort of what leaves you with hope, and who you're looking to for inspiration right now.
I'm looking to Drue for inspiration. Again, that was so beautifully articulated. She's making my job very easily. I just want to say ditto. In all seriousness, what you said was very inspiring. There are a lot of artists that are working in that vein across the entire spectrum of the art world, and I think there's a movement. I think from the artist-driven point of view, and from the gallerist, towards a new model where the public has a much greater vote on the value of the work. I think that's been happening across, again, every creative domain, and I think that's going to happen in painting. And I'm very familiar with the art world. I worked for Leo Castelli when I was a kid, and a lot of famous artists as well. And I saw, also my dad was a painter, studied with Mark Rothko and Ed Reinhardt. So like that was the model that was in my head. And I've seen the shift over my lifetime with the gallerists become the superstars more than the artists. And not having a take on that one way or the other, I think the model that's going to be more successful going on is when the galleries become more anonymous, and the artists allowed to take more of their promotion and sales into their own hands through the internet, through the social platforms that are available. I think the more galleries that get on board with that model, the more successful they're going to be. I think the artists that get more fluent in navigating those channels, those are going to be the ones that are going to make it. So I've been listening during this whole period to Gary Vaynerchuk.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah. Thank you. And Drue, I know we're going to close with one more of your videos. Just a sort of last 30 seconds on what are some of the bright spots that you see on the horizon.
Well, I was just going to, tag on to what Ben said about galleries taking a back seat. I don't think that we need them at all, actually. I think that the power is going to shift more into the artist's hands and the patron's hands, and into this commission model, which is amazing because when you, as a patron, commission a work of art, you have a role in birthing it into the world, to co-creating it, to helping shape the trajectory of that potential work. And your name is attached to it forever. And there's so many extraordinary examples. The Medicis are one of the most amazing examples because we remember their name centuries after they've left this earth, and we remember them because of the great art that they played a huge role in leaving us. So if you just buy something off the shelf, so to speak, in a retail model, it existed without you. It didn't need you. It didn't need your involvement in it. And so you're not attached to it. So from a patron point of view, I think it's a lot more exciting. And also from a unit economics point of view, it allows us as artists and art studios to invest the funds into higher quality materials, into actually what we're building. I think there's a lot of bright spots out there. And then the other thing that I wanted to say was, one of the questions you had asked us is, who are we looking to for inspiration? And there's many people, but one person that I look to a lot is Leonardo da Vinci. He was someone that was dissecting cadavers, dissecting human bodies up into his old age, and actually pushing the edge of the biological sciences as well as art. He also discovered many concepts in physics before anyone else could figure those things out. And he was truly an artist, engineer, technologist, scientist. And one thing that I think is kind of inspiring, if I could leave people with, is he loved to take notes. He just wrote voraciously, and he liked to make lists. But he made these incredible lists of things that he wanted to do, like, today I want to go get the measurements of the sun. I want to go find the lung of a pig and inflate it and see if it inflates lengthways or sideways. I want to go discuss that geometrical problem with a mathematician friend of mine, or a crowd pleaser, which is, today I want to go to the baths to observe the anatomy of naked men. So he had these really huge things on his list, like taking the measurements of the sun. That's what I'm going to do. So my challenge to everyone is, what's on your to-do list today? And make it bigger, make it colossal. And in just doing that one thing, you'll unleash so much more of your own creativity.
Yes. A great session. Thank Drue, Ben, and Kathy. Thank you so much. I'm going to go and rethink my list right now. And most importantly, thanks to everyone that's tuned in for this today, and for all of your great questions. We hope you enjoyed it and found it inspiring. Please do share some feedback with us, and any topics that you would like to hear covered in our future sessions, you can email us at community@worth.com. Next normal series, we're joined by chef and owner of Le Barnardin, Eric Ripert, Hallie Mayer, owner of Cafe Panna, and Charles Gibbs, CEO of Fever Tree North America, and Kathy Entwistle, where we'll discuss what the future of hospitality will look like for patrons, chefs, and restaurant owners, which is another really challenged industry right now. So please register online at worth.com/events for this. In the meantime, wishing you and your loved ones a very healthy and enjoyable rest of the week. Thank you so much, speakers.
Can I say something really quick, Juliet? I just want to encourage everyone to feel free to connect with Worth and with Ben and with myself and with Kathy on all of our different social platforms. So on Instagram, I am Drue Kataoka and Drue Kataoka Studios. I'm on Twitter as Drue Kataoka, and I'm on Facebook as Drue Kataoka Studios. And there's so much richness in this conversation. I think that we probably haven't even gotten to answer all of everyone's questions. So if anyone has any more questions for any of us, find Ben on Instagram and Kathy on Instagram. Maybe you guys can give your handles.
I agree. We'll include it in the follow-up. Oh, go on, Ben. What's your handle?
So either Ben Tritt, one word, or the company Artmatr. It's ARTMATR. ARTMATR.
And Kathy?
LinkedIn, sorry, Kathy Entwistle, Morgan Stanley. And my Instagram is Kathy Entwistle.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.